there aren't more beautiful looking films than Mad Max. So how awesome would it be to interview the colorist of Mad Max and ask him how the hell did he create that magic? Let's do that. What's going on, guys? This is Qazi. Welcome to another epic episode in this series where we interview industry titans. This time, we're going to be interviewing Eric Whipp, who's the colorist of Mad Max. Eric is a freaking genius. He is that guy who's going to make you not want to be a colorist. Not because he's mean, but he's just that good. So in this episode, we're going to be deep diving into his color grading pipeline and workflow when it comes to Mad Max, and just in general, like how does he attack these things? How does he come up with such crazy looks? And as always, the way I structure these is to bring you the most value. So grab a notepad. This is going to be loaded with information that's going to be relevant to you. And for those that want to level up their color grading game, check out the link in the description. 1 hour long free training where I will show you how to get the perfect skin tones out of your Sony S-Log 8-bit footage, how to get the clean white look. It's the go-to commercial look. How to get the creamy film look. How to fix the dreaded gamma shift, and much, much more. Link is in the description. And if you're enjoying the content, smash that like button. Subscribe to my channel for more awesomeness. Do not forget to follow me on Instagram. Value bombs are being dropped every single day. Let's roll the intro. What's going on, Eric?
Hello.
How's it going, man? Thanks for joining us.
Not a problem. I got nothing else to do. I'm sitting around in isolation. What else are we going to do these days?
It's a perfect time for this. I'm so stoked. Thank you so much. So I did an introduction, and Alter Ego, is this your company?
Yeah, I'm one of a couple of partners. But we have a company here in Toronto, in Canada, post-production. So we have 5 color suites up here, and 5 flame VFX suites, and a CG department, a motion graphics department, a little shooting department. So little company going on here.
That's amazing. That is so freaking incredible. So are you guys mostly handling, is it equipped to handle everything, or is it just commercials or features?
We are mostly commercials, like that's 90% of our business, but we take on the odd feature film here and there. We take on some short films, we take on music videos, documentaries, but we get pretty busy in commercials, so it takes up the majority of our time.
Okay, that's something that I'm very interested in, because that's majority of my work too. So we're going to be diving into that too. Eric, you're also a photographer. I mean, you love to take pictures of the skies that you like to replace in.
Yes. Sometimes my photos get pretty boring. They're just boring skies, but they're very useful.
They're so useful, and I'm so inspired, and I want to start doing that. So let's just track back before we even jump into Mad Max and all the, all that stuff. Like, let's just go back and talk about, the origin story a little bit. Like, where do you come from? Like, were you a cinematographer turned into colorist? Like, what's the story?
That's an interesting question. I went to film school like a lot of people, and, had grand ideas of, I didn't really know what I wanted to be, to be honest. I thought, everybody goes into film school thinking they want to be a director, and then you change your mind very quickly.
Same.
I got kind of fascinated with cinematography. I've been taking photos since I could hold a camera, so I was always interested in photography. Then, I thought to myself, oh, well, I guess I'll be in, I think I like the post side as well. I think I might just be an editor, because that's all I kind of knew, was editing or shooting, or that was it.
Right.
And then I stumbled across telecine, which, for those of you who don't know what that is, that's a bit of more of an older term, but telecine was the machine basically that would transfer film to video. And in that process, you applied color and you did all the color work. And I sort of quickly realized, like, hey, this is kind of post, this is kind of editing, and it's kind of cinematography. It's like everything,
right.
So I sort of fell into it there and got into it that way.
That is so amazing, and somewhat of a similar story. You went to school for film, and then majored in cinematography, minor in editing, and then while I'm shooting stuff, I'm realizing that something is missing. Like, what is that Hollywood sauce? Like, what is that thing that I'm missing? There's something there, and got me curious. Started using Apple Color, and it just got me all stoked. And then, you know, the Resolve 8 or whatever, and that's how I started too. So it's just interesting where you start to where you end up in this field. And you're 100% right. It's directing all the way. Like, somebody had told me a long time ago that they were just like, hey, you know, cinematographer is a big deal. And I was just like laughing. I'm like, the guy with the camera, like, what are you talking about? You know, you want to be a director if you talk about movies. And then you look into it, and what goes into it is crazy. Yeah. So are you using Baselight in your company? Like,
yeah, we about 12 years ago, we opened up Alter Ego, and we opened with 2 Baselight suites, and we've since expanded to 5 of them, plus a whole bunch of Baselight assist stations for all our assistants. But yeah, we sort of found that Baselight had everything we wanted, and especially, you also, a little backstory, when we opened Alter Ego, we were the first company in Toronto, if not a lot of North America, I'm not sure, but definitely in Toronto, the first company doing commercials in non-linear, using like these, you know, computer-based systems. Everything back then was still put your film up on the telecine, roll it through in real time, right, fast forward the film, rewind the film. Like, nobody was doing non-linear. So to grade a commercial was frustrating. You had to put up roll 1 and grade the wide shot, take a still frame, rewind that roll of film, put up roll 2, fast forward to the close-up, grade the close-up, and then rewind, go back to roll 1. And, you know, it was very hard to see your edit come together, right? So when we opened Alter Ego, the technology was just at the cusp where it was good enough to do. I mean, this was 2007, and I think there was already non-linear technology used in features and things, but the commercial turnaround is so short. How are you going to get your film scanned, get it all in there, get it all out again in 10 hours was a big issue. And it was just at the cusp where it was good enough. So we went in and opened up completely doing the non-linear workflow. And at that time, there wasn't really a ton of choice. Like, there was Resolve had just come out. You know, Baselight was out. There was a system called Dakota that was out. There was a Pandora system, I can't remember what it was called now, and the Luster system was out and stuff like that. But honestly, for what we wanted to do in commercials and have time code working and have, you know, all the little bells and whistles, and we had to do rough comps and do all these things, there really wasn't a choice. And it was like, it has to be Baselight. And I'm so glad we went that way, because the architecture of the way Baselight was written, I could tell even in those early days, the way it was written and the way it could handle like OFX plugins and things like that, I knew that this was going to be a system that would be really good for us down the road.
Now, I mean, correct me, you know, if I'm wrong, but Baselight keeps it pretty tight. Like, I mean, it's almost like the Avid. Like, yes, it's widely used, but still, when you think about the company, like as a whole, I mean, it's not, you know, Adobe. Like, in terms of just like the revenue and all that, and how they attack it, and then Blackmagic is kind of coming up too, you know, like how the strategies they're coming up with, creative ways to like giving you a software for free if you buy their camera, and then you get used to them and you want that ecosystem and everything. So with Baselight, why are they so tight? Like, I don't understand why they want to just keep it.
You know, that's a good question. I don't know. But I think their market was very much in the high-end commercial and feature workflow. And so what I think they've done, and what they are doing, they are opening it up a little, because what they're doing is they're supplying Baselight now for Avid and for Nuke and for Flame, and so all of these things can start to work in conjunction. But it was really a tool made specifically for, like, I guess, you know, it was really aimed at like the experienced kind of big commercial colorists or whatever. This is what it was, you know, designed by colorists as well. So it was very much done like that. And then it was only really, honestly, how many years ago was it now? It's probably only like, you know, 7 years ago or something that Resolve really became like such a open, cheap platform and everything. That sort of started changing the playing field. And I think, you know, we're already seeing Baselight coming along that way by offering all these other options.
Now, so, you know, I've seen you work, you know, like when you're creating keys and when you're getting in there, and I've never used Baselight, but what I've seen you do
it seems like it may or may not be possible in Resolve. Like, do you think that when it comes to like the compositing capabilities, like Baselight might have an edge, or do you think?
I think Baselight probably has an edge in the terms of the compositing. They're very good at, at that sort of structure. They're very much. It's funny. It started off very much as a colorist tool, but it's becoming more of a visual effects tool. It's really becoming a finishing station. So there's definitely an element of that. A bit, a lot of the stuff that we do on Baselight you can do on almost any program. It's just how you approach it and how you think about it.
Now, a movie like Mad Max, can that be created in DaVinci Resolve, or was Baselight, gave you that like a little extra edge?
It's been a long time since I've jumped on Resolve, so I'd have to check. But like the only thing that was really unique about Fury Road was, it's so here's a funny story. So I started on Fury Road with a couple of shots, just kind of playing around and trying to get some ideas of looks and things.
Right.
And I had this one shot that was a shot of a bunch of cars coming towards camera. It was very dusty, shot on the back of some other moving car. So there's just dust flying everywhere. And it was a crazy action shot. And the shot was just very gray. It's, grayish, beige dirt that wasn't very saturated. It was a little bit overcast. You got these cars coming towards us. There's dust in the frame. And I was like, okay, how can I make this look good? So I tried all these things. And no matter what I did, it was just a frame full of beige. There was no other color in there. And it was just it was very, very hard. So I kept trying to develop looks. And this was one, I only had 15, 20 shots to play with at the beginning when I was first working on it. So I was just trying to develop looks on these same shots over and over. And this one shot, I just couldn't work it out. And then I thought, we did this a lot in commercials, but I thought, I might do a sky replacement and actually put a whole new sky in there. I tried for days to get this guy. There was nothing to track. It was just a dust cloud, and it was impossible to track. And I was like, so I said to myself, make a mental note. Don't offer up sky replacements. It's going to be a nightmare on this film, right? Don't offer that up, because if George knows that we can do sky replacements, I've opened a can of worms. It's going to be a problem. Anyway, we started the film. I get to a completely different shot early on in the movie where I'm working on one of the scenes. And I was like, oh, God, just this shot needs a sky replacement. It would be so good. And I was like, you know what? I'll just do it on this one. And of course, I opened that can of worms and the whole thing opened up. And I remember, it was 6 months later, I finally got to the point of the film where that same shot I was struggling with came up in the edit. And I spent another day on it, and I managed to finally get it to track. So it worked out fine. But I guess cutting a long story short, the sky replacements became a thing on that film because, they shot sunny, cloudy, dusty, non-dusty. It's all over the place. So trying to match that film became a really difficult challenge. And one of the things that worked and helped was at least have a consistent sky. And, I was able to kind of replace a lot of the skies to get that feeling of consistency. So I'm not 100% sure about Resolve, whether it can do the same level of compositing of sky replacements like that. But that became a godsend on that film to do that.
That is insane. And again, I've seen how effortlessly you will put in a sky and track it. And I feel like in Resolve, no, not in the color page. You can go into Fusion and try to do that. But then Fusion is a different software that now is part of the DaVinci package. So it's almost like you can't just take your skills that, you've honed over time in Resolve and just apply it directly to Fusion. It's almost like you kind of have to learn it.
Right.
But no, not as effortless, I would say. That is insane. And it is so freaking funny because every time I experience that, you go above and beyond, and then that becomes the norm. That's expected, right? The director is just going to be like, hey, can we do a little more of that? Can we do a little more of that? But I mean, it was worth every single cent because literally just like me, there's so many people are literally writing saying, I wanted to be a colorist after I saw Mad Max. So that must make you feel really freaking proud to what you created. And it's something that's going to go in the books. It's like anytime I buy a new TV and I want to see how good it's going to look, I judge it based on how Mad Max looks on it. I'm being serious.
That's funny.
You know, how
Right.
much what we can see. So, okay, you know, you have, I feel like you are a perfect blend of like technical and creative, right? Like when you were working on a job. But when you were starting out, what was the driving force? Was it, I want to play with these colors and see what I can do? Or was it like, I like that this field is so technical that, you know, sort of like a specialty thing, like it's going to be my thing? Like what's,
You know, it's a little bit of both. It's always a bit of both. Like I love cinematography. I love lighting. I couldn't wait to get looks and try things. And when I started, of course, going back to the telecine thing, it was all on telecine. And I literally had to walk around with a screwdriver in my back pocket and keep tweaking the, you know, parts of this machine was a terrible machine. It had noise problems and all, and you had to keep tweaking and fix the shading and do all this stuff to get the right image. But at the same time, you got to experiment on a different level, like stuff that we don't do today. But on telecines, you would take pieces of glass and put them in the lens and move it around while you're transferring the film, and stockings and things, you know. So you do all these other things, which was fun. So, you know, like everyone, when you first start off, you end up doing, you know, the more experimental things and short films and music videos. And so whenever I got a music video, I was like, ooh, I'm going to get in there with a bit of glass and wave it around and play with it. And so, you know, there was definitely that period of, you know, exploration that was so much fun to get into. And then you really start to develop looks. And then throughout that process, you develop the skill set where you go, oh, you know what? I'm going to remember that helped this shot. And then, you know, you can solve your problems that way, which is really ultimately the biggest skill that a good colorist can have, is being able to solve problems and quickly and have that experience.
I got in so much trouble once I said, like, being a colorist, you know, you just have to be a troubleshooter, because I come from a IT background as well. And I just said, like, you know, as a colorist, I approach it as like, I look at the shot as a problem. What do I need to fix? And people got so offended. They didn't know how to take it, what I was trying to say. And that's exactly what I meant, you know, when I said that. Because again, like when I see how you isolate things and objects and how effortless it is, it's kind of insane. Unless you're a colorist and you can just look at what is happening there, it never pops out. But then to a colorist, it pops out so much more. Like the last scene of Mad Max, when I'm going to try to pull this up. Let me see if I can do that.
Oh, we've got audio visuals.
Yeah, I have some shots that I've brought in here. Let me see. Oh, didn't bring those in. It keeps happening to me. Like I try to save it and then it doesn't come in. So the last shot, like where he's looking up at Charlize Theron's character and he's walking away. I mean, you think that there's a spotlight on him, but then I can tell that you're popping him out, and then he's in the crowd, but all you see is just him, like walking away. Things like that, where it's so effortless, but it helps the story so much more. And I feel like I see that so much in Mad Max. So people can just go, how much is done in, you know, cinematography, like, or in production than post. And I feel like you've struck that perfect balance where you've gone, like, you pushed it and you created such a look, yet the story is the, you know, center of it. You know, so what is that? Like, I mean, how far is too far? And then where do you center yourself to be like, okay, this is the main focus, but then I'm going to build everything around that? How do you manage that?
You know, I'm still learning that. You know, George Miller, the director, is amazing. First of all, he's a great visionary filmmaker, but he also has, you know, an amazing eye as well. And there are times where, Shane, let me rewind there. What I really want to say there is that, like, you know, one thing I did learn really drummed into me working with George is the importance of story. And really, ultimately, that's what we're doing. And, you know, that's what Mad Max is all about. It might be a little bit of a, you know, crazy look, but that's part of, it's a crazy film. It's meant to suit that story. And, you know, my job is also to help that story literally shot by shot. Like, how do we draw the attention of the audience? How do we draw their eye into what's important in that shot or in that moment or whatever it might be? And, you know, sometimes I'll do things and I think, oh, that's too far.
Right.
And then George will go, no, it's not far enough. And I'm like, really? That seems ridiculous to me. But then sometimes you'll watch it back and you're like, you know what, he was right. And there are times where I'm constantly surprised that I can go further and I can keep pushing. And so that's a forever evolving landscape where you're trying to learn that.
Isn't that crazy? Like how your mind just plays tricks. Like you'll go take a break and you come back and you look at the same shot that you thought something else of, and then you look at it again and you're like, what the hell was I thinking?
Yes. That is a good tip for anyone into color is it's not a bad thing to leave the screen for 2 minutes and come back again and you'll see it in a different light. There's another trick that is really good that I tell people all the time, which is a trick that George uses in editing, but it's really good for color as well. And if you take your image and you finish grading, you think it's where you think it's working, and you're playing across your scene and you think the grade is okay, try a version where you flop every shot and flip it around the other way. So the action, instead of going left to right, is now going right to left. And your brain is forced to look at it completely new, because your brain cannot, if you ever take a picture and you flip it, you go, oh, that looks weird. There's always that moment where it looks weird when you flip it. So if you do that, once you've done a scene, you're forced to look at the scene in a completely different way. And then you'll discover things that are drawing your eye that shouldn't be there, or you're looking at things in a different way. So that's a good little tip that sometimes we used.
I'm trying it. This is crazy. That's insane. Working on something like Mad Max, where you have so much freedom to just kind of let loose and have fun with it, and then going back to the commercial side of things, where most of the time, like, you're sticking with the brand's look, and you're kind of, I wouldn't go as far as saying restricted, but sort of like make it look natural and poppy, is the comment that goes with it. How do you just go with it, like with the champion's attitude, or is there like a fine line where you will still kind of show them your way? It is
definitely case by case scenario. There are some jobs in a commercial that they come in and they're like, all right, well, this is what it is, right? And there is no point trying to fight it. They just want a clean something, or there is a already prescribed look that we have to adhere to, right? So there's definitely those scenarios, but then there's, a lot of people, especially, the clients that I work with, often they come in with a blank slate. Like, I don't know, what do you think? And they're like, okay, well, let's try this, right? Inevitably, the other problem working in commercials is you have a lot of people in the room and everybody has their opinion, and you start somewhere and it just ends up becoming a little bit mundane by the end. But generally, there's a fair amount of freedom to explore.
Okay, so that's a little different question than Mad Max, but through this pandemic, like, have you offered remote services before, or are you doing it now? And how do you think it's going to change anything in the future when it comes to post-production, especially color grading?
I wish I knew the answer to that, because that would make everybody very rich. We were definitely we've been doing remote services. We built a system back in 2008 for doing remote grading. And that's been so useful. We've been using it for years to get DPs and directors who are always flying around all over the place. We've been getting them involved in color and into the sessions and commercials. In fact, we used that Studio Link system on Mad Max to link up George and the VFX teams and show work in progress. Because I did a lot of the movie here in Toronto, and then I would fly back to Sydney with George and come back again, back and forth a lot. So, so we've been doing remote sessions for a very long time. The biggest struggle we've always had with it is the human connection is missing a little bit. It's great, you can have a video call and everything, but there just isn't as much of that, the instant connection and expression in someone's face. And you can read a room by just turning around and sort of seeing what people are kind of thinking when they're not really paying attention to see how things are going. And when you don't have that ability to do it, it does become a bit more difficult. The other issue with doing so much remote work is, what are people watching it on, which is a big issue. I've got a nice calibrated monitor here, but what do you have on your laptop or what, I don't know. So that becomes a big issue. But, we've been working through it at the moment, and, partly because we have no choice, but, it's working well, and we've got solutions, and there's definitely ways of getting around it. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I think what's going to happen is we'll ease out of this. We're not going to, it's not like they're going to open the door and go, okay, everybody just go back to filling a room full of people. And, we'll ease into this for a while, and, eventually we'll probably end up getting back to the way we were.
No, that's a great answer. I couldn't agree more. I mean, yesterday I was working on a commercial, did a live session, and same thing. Like, I mean, there were two directors. So co-directors, one is saying it's looking too green. Like, everybody has jaundice, whereas the other director is going, I don't see that. And I'm like, I don't see that. Like, it's looking fine to me. And he was like, really? And like, they were even in different places, because obviously, everybody's working from home. So, I mean, that is a big thing. And it's difficult. Like, I mean, I've even, come up with a solution where at one job, I actually sent a calibrated monitor to a client and had him just like, hey, watch my stuff on this. But that's not very practical, and you can't do it for every client. Okay, so Mad Max, SDR version, HDR version, black and white. Did you also grade the black and white version as well?
No, I didn't do the black and white. Black and white, I'm not actually 100% sure who did it, but I know they took our master, because you couldn't start again on that movie because there's so much work was done. So they basically took the master and essentially made a black and white and did a few vignettes and things. So I'm not sure who did it.
So when grading for SDR and HDR, where are you starting first? Are you starting SDR and then eventually doing the HDR pass, or how does it work?
That is an interesting question. Like, most of the films I've done, the HDR has always come later. Mad Max, in fact, HDR didn't exist really. It wasn't even a thing until after we had already delivered the movie.
That's crazy.
Where on Lego, it was an after thing, but we're keeping an eye on it throughout the process. I think we will eventually get to the point where HDR should be the main mastering, but we're in a tricky situation with these kind of, especially if you're on one of these larger features, is the main audience is that cinema experience for the first time, and so they want to make sure that is premium, and that's what the directors are used to. That's what they want to go in and watch. Nobody wants to huddle around the little HDR monitor and that becomes, even though that's where it's going to live its longest life. And so I think we will see a switch at some point. And I think as projectors become more capable of doing, closer to an HDR, I think we'll probably see, the HDR mastering become the first thing you do.
I mean, even with TVs, right? Because every TV, like, I feel like as soon as like your TV kicks into the Dolby Vision or whatever it is when you're watching something on Netflix, sometimes it's too much. Like, I just watched Mindhunter season 2 and it kicked into Dolby Vision, and seriously, I had to turn it off. I went back to my Apple TV and turned it off and went back to SDR, and then when I watched it, everything just looked fine. Everything looked great, because with the Dolby Vision, it was just adding so much warmth and green that I'm like, okay, something is not right. And I think there's too much at the table right now. Like, are your consumers, what are they watching it on? What's going on? There's so much happening that I feel like, I personally believe that it's still a little bit, ways away, but it definitely will come very soon. I want to get into, let's just jump right into it. So Mad Max, I mean, how's the process, pre-production process? Are you brought on pretty early on because you have worked with George before? So what was that like?
Yeah, I wasn't brought on super early. Like, I knew about it. I knew it was happening. My name was thrown around there for a while. Then I came on sort of, kind of as they're wrapping up shooting, or actually, sort of mid-shooting, wrapping up shooting. And started preliminary looks at that point. There wasn't really much I can do during the shoot until everything is done. There was a good, there was a clear vision about what everybody needed to do and shoot. And, so I sort of came on it was still about 13 months before we finished the movie. It was a long, it was a long process. And then, I started developing looks fairly early, while editing is miles away. We're, we didn't have a cut yet, but I'm starting to develop looks on random. That's why I said I had like 15 or 20 random shots that I was working on for a while. And that was the tricky part, because I'm trying to develop looks, but I don't 100% know how anything's been cut yet. I haven't seen anything yet. So you're just really looking at shots and trying to think about things. The interesting part about Mad Max is that, I grew up and I watched all the original movies. I knew them really well. I always thought to myself, oh yeah, this should be like a gritty, desaturating gritty look or something like that. That's the way my mind originally went when I saw dailies coming through. I was like, oh, that looks too clean and perfect. Nobody wants that bright thing. It should be gritty and dark and,
Book of Eli.
And, there was a stills photographer on set taking stills for press releases and stuff. And he had that same kind of desaturated, gritty look and everything. You still see them on the internet today. But it's completely different to where the film ended up. And one of the things that happened is, so I came up with all these looks and I had a few ideas, and some were very saturated, some weren't, some were gritty, they're all over the place. So I had the whole range of styles. And I went to Sydney and spent a couple of weeks working with George on developing the looks. And by that stage, we had, 2 or 3 scenes kind of rough cut, so we could sort of get a sense of the film. And the one thing that he said, which I thought was really interesting, he says, I don't want another desaturated post-apocalyptic movie. That's all everybody has done. Almost since he did Mad Max 30 years ago or more. Like, every movie that has come out there has been the same look. It's the same desaturated post-apocalyptic look. So his thoughts were, we've either got to go like full color or we go black and white. Like, there's only two. I don't want to go in the middle anymore. I want it to be strikingly different. So, and obviously he wasn't able to sell, that movie as a black and white movie. That's not going to work. So we had to go down the full color pipeline. The hard part when you're developing a look on something like that is it's not as simple as just taking a shot and cranking the saturation button. Right. No it looks like a bad 1980s music video if you do that. It looks terrible, right? Everything is just red and the sky is like purpley blue. It looks awful. So then it was a lot of fine tuning about how do I get a saturated feeling where it's really quite rich in color, but it's not just cranking the saturation knob.
Right. So, I mean, what is that? I mean, is it, what are you doing? Like, are you using a lot of, is most of that action happening in primaries wheels, or is there another trick?
It's a combination. There's probably, I can't even remember anymore, but I think on every shot there was like a base correction of about 5 layers to kind of get the overall look from the majority of the movie, right? And then that's just the base correction. And then we go into layering whatever else needs to happen. And so by the time you finish a shot, there's often 40 layers or more of stuff to get the look. But yeah, it's a combination of a little bit of primaries, a little bit of keying, a little bit of filtering. There's a few things going on there, and some highlight roll off and black roll off and things, and just different setups to get that look.
Now, I mean, I read so much about Mad Max that I just want to make sure that I still ask those questions for everybody that's watching. So if I read it correctly, it was like an 18-month process to grade the movie. Is that right?
Something like that. It wasn't, and I should clarify, it wasn't like I was sitting at the desk for 18 months non-stop.
Right, for sure.
There was an 18-month period from when we started the movie to when we finished the movie. And lucky for us, it was like one of those, the stars are aligned kind of moments, because it was such a pleasure to work on this film, and to be given so much time was amazing, because you wouldn't want to be rushed on a movie like that. And so what ended up happening is that they shot can't remember exactly what months they shot, but they shot throughout a year, and then they were in the editing process. And cutting a long story short, they didn't shoot the bookends of the movie. They didn't shoot the beginning and the end. They got very delayed on set, and they were running out of time. And the bookends are all set in like the Citadel area, which were all going to be in studios and sets and things. So they just said, let's get the desert stuff done now while we have the actors and get it through. And they shot the bulk of the movie minus the beginning and the end of the movie, basically. Then around Christmas time, I can't remember what year this was, 2012 or 13, one of those years. They got all the actors back together for a few weeks to shoot the bookends of the film. And by that stage, they had a rough cut. So they shot a few pickups here and there of like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we got this reaction now that we're cut it together, right? So they did all that. So essentially, we're looking around, the Christmas kind of time. Then the movie was due to be released in May. And that only gave us like 4 months to finish the movie, which is incredibly tight considering those bookends all needed tons of visual effects. They needed all this work. And so we were going to have a very compressed schedule. And then something happened. I think Star Wars was due to be around the same time. This was the year that the first Star Wars sort of came out. And they moved to a Christmas time slot, which meant that the May time slot was definitely a thing. Or I can't remember. There's some weird, I don't understand how Hollywood works and why their studios make certain films at certain times, but that's what they did. Yeah. But then the World Cup soccer was on in May that year, and they didn't want to conflict with that, and they didn't want to. There was all these, so they decided in a nutshell, they decided to push the movie 1 year later, and also we needed more time for post anyway. So suddenly we had an extra 12 months, which is amazing.
That is
so. Over the next, over that 18-month period, I would dabble and get into the film, a day or two when I can, go back to commercials, go back and do a couple of days, go back to, and sort of on and off over 18 months. So it wasn't like I was sitting on the movie for 18 months.
It's so great that you have this much time to work on it. Now, we did talk about you experimenting with different looks, but specifically, is there photography or painting or something that you're inspired by that you used as an inspiration, or is it all happening in the coloring bay? Like you're just getting inspired as you're doing it?
I don't know. I can't remember anymore. There was definitely certain pieces of stuff that we were inspired by here and there. And there was some great concept art that we looked at that we thought was great. But in a nutshell, we're really dealing with what we have and trying to work with the footage and make that as good as we can. I can't remember if there was, it's been so long, I can't remember if there was anything specific, but the majority of it really honestly was like working out how we're going to get this film to look interesting. The big problem with the film, which I probably should have talked about earlier, but one of the big problems with a film like that is that the actors are essentially wearing beige. Their skin tone is beige. The desert is beige. There's not a lot going on in the movie in terms of color. And the only other color is sky. So everyone looks at Mad Max and they're like, oh, it's the teal orange look. Well, it wasn't really intentionally that. It's just that we only had two colors, essentially. We have a sky, and then we have these characters and this sand and this grit and this other look. So we used that sky and pushed it quite strong wherever we could to really get some separation, because otherwise it's like the whole film would look beige. And then because the movie is one giant chase scene, how do we make it varied? How do we make it not look exactly the same for 2 hours? We've got to find ways of bringing that up. So that's where we would look into each scene. What if this scene was more of a bleached out white sky, and this scene would be a bit of a stormier sky, and this scene, we sort of came up with different ways to approach it based on what was happening in the story to keep it interesting.
Now, let's deep dive, because I have some questions about that too. Like somebody asked, how do you separate the skin? And it's the same thing, like what you just said, beige on beige. So how do you then separate it? Are we pulling keys on pretty much every single shot?
Yep. Pulling keys every shot. We're doing a lot of roto, especially the night stuff, which I guess we'll talk about in a separate.
Yeah,
I would imagine. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, a lot of windowing and shapes and stuff. Like every eyeball I hand rotoed in that movie.
Oh my God. This is so great to hear that, because so many people here are just like, oh, if a grade takes more than 8 minutes, then it's not applicable. You can't do that like in real world. Well, this is real world, like as real as it gets. This is crazy.
Yeah. People are often afraid to put the work in color for some reason. There's a tendency, and I'm guilty of it as well sometimes. You know, you grade away, you get a bit of a look, and then you're like, that's good. I don't know if I want to touch it anymore, but why not? Why not try something else? Why not push it another? Why not just constantly looking for a way to improve it in some way? And that's what we had to keep doing with Mad Max. Is look at every shot.
This is the greatest advice. Like seriously, this is so simple what you just said, but it's so freaking deep, because it just can't be more true. Like so many people, like this is the difference. Like when you watch Mad Max, when you watch John Wick, when you watch Joker, like there's stuff that's happening. Something magical is happening that is universal, that my mom can see it and think that this looks great. My son can see it and he thinks that it's great. And me as a professional can look at it and think that it's great. And it's that little extra mile that you just talked about. It's something that you guys are thinking and going above and beyond that like last step. That, you know, you're there and it looks good and you can print it. But if you just take it a step further, that's that thing.
We used to have this saying while we're working on the film, which no offense to anyone that has worked on Transformers, but we used to have this kind of saying of like, let's make this not like Transformers. Because I found like that, you know, the Transformers movie, when they got into the action scenes, it was very confusing as to who's who. Like, is that a good guy? It's just metal and stuff flying across the screen. Where
yes.
one of the goals of Mad Max, because it is essentially one giant action film, was to make sure that your eye knew exactly where to go. And whenever, if something happened and someone moved across the screen, when the shot cut, we would make sure that your eye was in exactly the right place on the next shot, so you didn't have to scan back over and look for anything. Like, so there's a lot of what we called eye scan. So every shot, we would make sure that on the cut, you were looking at exactly the right moment, so you didn't have to search the frame. So we would do a lot of shaping and moving stuff around. Obviously, a lot in cinematography. They center framed everything as much as they could. We would, in the final color, we would reframe shots so they would line up so that things would be easy to watch. And we would really spend a lot of time drawing your eye to what was important in that shot. Well, you know, if a shot is a guy picks up a pen off a table and that's all it is, I don't want to be distracted by anything else. I want to know that I saw a guy pick up a pen, right? And so, well, how can I do that in color? What can I do to make sure that that is what I needed to see?
That is, again, this is just all gold, because so many people get lost in the initial look. Like if they create something from log to something, that they get so excited that they were like, okay, done. Like I'm done. But this is that extra step that you're talking about that really, like, this is where you become a colorist. Like you become an artist, like where you're putting focus where it needs to be, then like an overall look. And it made all the difference, because just listening to you and reading about Mad Max and then watching it over and over again, I start to pick up on those things that even as a trained eye, I didn't when I was watching it, because the job was like so well done that I was just focusing on it, like on the action. And what you said about Transformers, I personally don't know how much it is color than cinematography, where I don't know why they chose to use like these long shots, like or these super tight shots of like these two metals fighting with each other, because I felt the same thing where I'm just like, wait, why don't you just pull back and give me sort of like, you know, a long shot where I can see what is happening? Like, you know, the storm scene when it's brewing, like in Mad Max, like you're seeing it from here. You're not in there in like one particular cloud seeing what's happening, you know? So those decisions are so important too. I want to talk about, now let's just get into the day for night. Let's start with how much, like, was it pre-planned, and how much is it done for you in production, like, you know, on set, so when it gets to you, it's easy to jump in and create it?
Okay, so the problem with Mad Max is, I should say, I always start off with problem with, there's nothing wrong with the movie. But one of the issues with Mad Max is that you have people driving through a desert in cars. There is no way you're going to be able to light an entire desert. No. Practically. There is no light big enough in the world, even if you had those balloon lights and you strung them up. The cars are moving. You cannot light a desert scene at night. So they knew going into it that they're going to do a day for night treatment. And George was really inspired by those old Western movies that had that very day for night blue look. He really loved that as a storytelling kind of device and how it looked like that. We developed so many different night looks on this movie that we had very realistic looking night. We had, very kind of teal looking nights. We had very blue, which is where we ended up going. We had all these different looks, very silvery looks, all kinds of stuff. But essentially, George is like, we've just been watching beige for an hour. Let's go blue and really slam them with the night scenes, right? Which I think it was a good decision. So the way they shot the day for night is all shot in the middle of the day, in full sun or in shade or whatever they were dealing with. There was the only thing that they did in production, there's no filters used on camera, there's nothing else. The only thing that they did, which was quite controversial at the time, was they shot 2 to 3 stops overexposed, which normally sounds like a big no-no, but they were watching scopes, making sure they never clipped out highlights because they were shooting on the Alexa camera, had a lot of range. So without clipping the highlights, they would overexpose. And when you overexpose a shot, there's a creaminess and a sort of a softness to that image that actually looks like a nighttime shot. So if you were to take your stills photo, take a stills camera out and go out in the middle of the night and do a long exposure and expose up a nighttime shot, it would look very similar to a daytime shot that's been overexposed, that's been brought back down. So the other reason for that is when you overexpose the shot, you have a ton of detail and range in the shadows. And one of the things that you want to achieve with the night is the sense that everything is dark, but I can see in the shadows because your eyes would have adjusted and there isn't as much difference between highlights and shadows. And so really what we ended up having to do was take these overexposed frames, grade them down, and then selectively we would go through and roto out what we wanted to see in that frame. And we had all that range in there to bring it up so we could see the face clearly. You could see under a wheel arch, or you could see under, see a tire or whatever you wanted to see in that frame. We had all that range, but it gave you that, there was a sort of also this sort of creaminess to it as well. We spent a lot of time trying to work out how bright to go. We had one version of the film that actually it wasn't as blue. It was a little bit more steely. It was quite dark. It was actually quite realistic looking in terms of night, but you couldn't see anything. You're just like looking for I can't quite see. It's really dark, right? And so we decided that, it's a very, comic book vibe to this whole film anyway. So we decided at one point is let's open it up and start going brighter. So the film, when we first see night, it's actually quite dark. And over the next 5-6 shots, we creep it up and we make it brighter and brighter till it's like your eyes adjust to the night and you don't notice anymore.
Man, you're a genius.
But there were definitely times where shots would come in and I would be like, really? We're going to do this for like literally the actor squinting into the sun. There's a flare in the frame.
Oh,
and I'm
my
like,
God.
This looks nothing like night. But, we just played the sun as the moon. And you use that as your method.
You buy it. Like, you just feel like if I'm in the desert, like in the middle of the night, like it's going to be that bright. It's going to be like that. And you just start buying it. And it is unbelievable to how hard it must have been and how fake it is to make it look real and feel real. Like you're shooting in the day, like you said, and overexposing it on top of that. And so many questions were actually about, how did he create that creamy look in the night? And you just answered all of that. So many people were just intrigued about that.
John Seal, the cinematographer, kept going up to Andrew Jackson, who's the visual effects supervisor. He kept going up to him on set going, are you sure this is right? All the way through, because nobody thought this just seemed wrong to overexpose all your footage, but it did work.
That's insane. Now, how much help are you getting in terms of rotoing those skies in? Because you did mention somewhere, I read that you were also doing sky replacement in the night scenes too. Did that happen or no?
In some of the night scenes for sure. I think I don't know. I'd love to. One day I should find the project and count them, but it must have been 600 sky replacements in the movie or something like that. We have a great team at Alter Ego, so there's a whole bunch of people at Alter Ego that helped me out with some of the roto. And we had a little team, a DI team in Sydney that they were great at, like, they would set everything up, get all the scenes, all the conforms and all that kind of thing organized for me. And then the one bit I felt really bad about, because this movie was also in stereo, it was in 3D as well. And we just graded the 2D first. And when we go to do the stereo, it's a painstaking roll. The only real way of doing it at the time was to go through every layer and look at every shape. Okay, left eyeball, line up the right eye of the thing, and line up every keyframe that I put in and everything. So those poor guys had to go through and fix all the we would grade the left eye, and then the right eye would be the other half of the stereo. And then so the right eye would be a ton of work for someone to go and wiggle all the shapes around and put them in position.
Oh my God. I'm so glad it's not you. Would have taken just...
No.
Oh, wow. That is insane. And that's such an interesting thing to know. Are we going to keep doing 3D, you think?
I don't know. Some people love it. George loves it. I don't know. I've never been the biggest fan of 3D. Same. I think if we can get away from the glasses and the ghosting and all those issues, maybe. Yeah.
No, I couldn't agree more. I'm right there with you, which probably will happen. Another question that we got is, so the night scenes are unapologetically blue, and it's the right kind of blue. It's the Terminator 2 blue. Like, it's just like what we used to get, like blue.
We called it the old-fashioned Hollywood spaghetti western blue, right? It was meant 100. To feel like one of those old westerns where you see the cowboy walk out into the day and it's all blue. That was the idea behind it.
No, I absolutely love it. But then there's a lantern that keeps it warm. Like, there's those things. So again, just tons of jiggery pokery. You're just
roto. Roto everyone's faces, add spill. We use a lot of lens flares as well. I'd use OFX plugins and stuff to put flares on headlights, on certain things, glow them out, just to kind of give you that illusion.
Are you using Sapphire or something else?
Sapphire.
Sapphire is good. I love it. Okay, we have 7 minutes before we get booted, so I want to get into some questions. And one of the questions is creating a look in Mad Max and how far you want to go with it to create some visual interest, since it's beige on beige, like you said. What about costumes? Like, do costumes get affected, like the actual hue of the costumes? And is it okay? Like, when do you know that, okay, I got to keep that? Yeah.
You look at the overall shot as a look. You think of it like a camera filter. Okay, if I put this filter on, of course the costumes are going to go. If I put a warm filter in, the costumes will go warmer, skin will go warmer, everything goes warmer. That's the filter. So the base look is really the filter. Like, this is our look. And then, for sure, there would be times where we would have to go and fix up something in terms of costume, or if it was important to the story, we need to see it, or if it was, there's all kinds of minutiae that you go through. The people's skin we have to fix sometimes. There's whatever the case may be, you definitely get in there. But we weren't too worried about, if the overall look twisted the costume a little bit, we saw it as more like the way the camera was filtered over the whole piece.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And that's a good advice for people that are kind of dealing with that or struggle with that. Another question that I have is, like, to a colorist, skin tones. I mean, everybody just sings a song about skin tones. So are there any general or good practices to what a good skin tone is in a specific environment? Because that's going to change, right? We're watching John Wick and they're in the freaking club. The skin tones are not going to look like yours and mine right now, So is there do you have any tips on that? Anything?
That's a hard question to answer. I know every scenario is so different, but I'm always just trying to find, a consistency of some sort in the skin tone, some kind of evenness. I mean, if the whole thing is blue and the skin is blue and everything, that's fine. That's part of the look, But if you are trying to, the big thing I think is the level of exposure on the skin is the big thing. I generally don't want it to go too bright. and you want to, otherwise everything can become quite pasty if you get too bright. So generally it's finding that balance of exposure that will often help you more than the color. Like if someone is, you know, heavily lit and a little bit overexposed, and you're trying to get that, you know, goldeny kind of skin tone, it's going to look bizarre when they're exposed up that high. If you just expose it down a little, then naturally the skin tone will fall into the right place.
Man, there's so many freaking tips here, and how you're explaining it, it's just light bulbs on light bulbs. So really appreciate it. I want to ask you, working on something like Mad Max, you get the dailies, you see like what the movie is gonna be. Do you know before you jump into it that this is going to be one of those? Do you know that it's going to be one of those iconic movies? And especially on the color grading end too, like before you even start getting into like grading it.
I had seen stills before I got in, and I'd seen storyboards as well. So I knew production wise it's going to be a great looking film in terms of that. I didn't know. Nobody knows. All filmmaking is a bit of a gamble. You don't know if it's going to be a hit or a flop or anything. And I have to admit, when I first saw the very first cut of Mad Max, I actually went home that evening going, ugh. Because it was an assembly cut. It wasn't a fine cut. It was very long. It was just like, oh, I don't know if this is going to be a good film or not. But it's such early days. You can't really judge it. It's like, you've got to give it time to refine and get in there. But I could tell just by looking at the production design, the vehicle design, the costume design, it's like, holy moly, this is a good looking film in that respect, right? And so then there's that pressure of like, I gotta make sure I deliver what I need to do to keep it up to that standard. You know, because it's such a collaboration. Everyone in their departments they're the best at what they do. So everyone's doing their best they can, and you know, can't let the color down.
No, seriously. I mean, it's just like the stakes are so high. Does Eric Whipp has an Eric Whipp signature look? Or, I mean, I know that it changes somewhat like from project to project, but do you still have like this sweet spot or this happy spot, like place where you go?
I don't know the answer to that. I find in commercials, like every day is a completely different thing. I have to move from one thing to another. There's definitely things that I like, that I find pleasing. So I will often find I'll end up in a similar kind of spot. You know, I like color separation. I like having, you know, if I'm meant to focus on a person, I would rather that person be on a slightly different shade of color than their skin tone. I find when it's all just the same, it's hard to focus. You know, looking at you now, your wall is a grayish tone behind you compared to your skin, which is immediately separating you, right? But if your wall was the same color as your skin, it's like, you know, so color separation is something that, you know, it's probably one of the first things I look at if I'm looking at a shot, like, I wonder what I could do with this. I'll just look and say, can I improve it in any way by separating and helping, if the person is the thing we're meant to look at, assuming that is, you know, then I would try to make sure that there's a tiny bit of separation in there to help that.
That's a great tip. I want to ask you, if another Mad Max like film comes around, will you say yes or no? With knowing like what you have to do,
absolutely.
500 sky replacements.
It's hard work, but it's worth doing. So absolutely, I do it again.
Man, how I mean, does it feel amazing to know that you not only inspired but just created a thing? Like, I mean, you know, Transformers for a minute was a thing, but when you think of Mad Max, like you said, it's so much more. It's not just like the teal and orange or whatever, that certain thing like gimmick. Like when I watch it, there's some truth to these colors, but then they're so pushed, and it's like, to know that you created that, I mean, it's got to be amazing, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was it's a dream job. It really was. So, you know, I'm happy with the result. There's always something I look at in every movie I've ever done and go, I wish I had done this. And, I can't believe I let that go like that. You know, there's always something, but yeah, I'm pretty happy with the result.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to joining us. Like, I know it means the world to everybody here, and it means the world to me. Really appreciate it. And your tips were just literally like it's a game changer. So really appreciate your time.
Not a problem.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
So hopefully this gives you an idea on that it's not always like 2 or 3 nodes and just keep it very simple. Sometimes it has to get super surgical. You have to really get in there. You have to replace the sky. You have to track every single eyeball, and just don't be afraid of doing those things. So that's what we learned with Eric. Hopefully you picked up tons of stuff that you can apply to your next project. Smash that like button, subscribe to my channel for more awesomeness. Do not forget to check out the link to the free trainings down below. I will see you guys in the next video.